So thank you. Camille?
Thanks, Nicole, and thank you, Harold, and thank you all for having us here today to give you a little bit more information about the client concierge service. I know I've been kind of doing a roadshow, a virtual roadshow here with touring this information, and I see familiar faces, and this may be the second time you will hear this, but hopefully this gives you some more idea about what the client concierge service is about. So just have a few, can everyone see this? Just making sure. So you may be familiar with the name concierge. It's used in the hotel service industry. Now it's used in the medical industry, where, you know, doctors set up a concierge service to provide individualized care for patients. And we also now have curbside takeout concierge in the time of COVID. But the newest concierge service is really Deep's concierge service. So, and as Harold pointed out, it is centered around the Commissioner's 20 by 20 overall goal to improve communication with our stakeholders about Deep's processes. So this service is out of the central office because we want this to be the central point of contact for stakeholder assistance with environmental permitting. And the core mission of the service is to really facilitate communication between stakeholders and Deep's permit programs, and to guide projects through the complex permitting process. So the word concierge is just a fancy way to really connote great customer service and communication. As Nicole pointed out, we are in the Office of Planning and Program Development in the Office of the Commissioner. We have a dedicated email address. And we also have our own webpage on Deep's website, and those are provided for you here. So you may be, familiar, as Nicole was saying, with the function of the Office of Planning and Program Development to provide permit assistance, and you may have heard of or participated in a pre-application meeting to discuss which permits are appropriate for your project. And really the permit assistance that's offered is available to assist any applicant. The concierge service is part of the permit assistance group, and really its focus is on outreach to our stakeholders and providing what you might say is post-application assistance to increase that communication between, the permitting programs and getting the permit completed. So the concierge service is going to focus on a limited number of projects at any one time, and you'll see why in a minute. So what does the concierge service do? So we really want to focus on complex projects with multiple permit requirements. And those often require a lot of meeting coordination and permit sequencing. Which permit do I need to start first or get first for this particular project? in order to be able to get permits in a tighter time frame. So there's that aspect of it, and there's also, you know, by providing this service to our customers, we can assist our permit programs to, you know, really enable staff to focus on their specific technical review and to really uphold the permit standards and environmental quality. So it's important to note here that the concierge service does not replace DEEP's current permitting processes. We really hope to complement the permit process and to help our stakeholders navigate the process. So basically, by supporting our permits and our permit programs and our applicants, we can smooth that permitting path and achieve greater stakeholder satisfaction. So the types of projects, and this is not a complete list, this is just sort of to give you an idea of the flavor of things that we've been working on so far. The types of projects that the concierge team is focusing on are highly complex projects with multiple permitting requirements, projects that are in response to COVID-19, shovel-ready projects, and projects that support economic development in an environmentally responsible way. So when I want to clarify, when we say highly complex projects with multiple permitting requirements, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a big business. It could be a medium-sized business or a small business, but those may require multiple permitting requirements. So, excuse me. Haven't had my orange juice yet today. Okay, so we envision projects coming to us through coordination with the pre-application assistance. And I often attend pre-application assistance meetings just to see if concierge services might be necessary. We haven't gotten anything in yet through the concierge inbox, but that's new. And that is also a way that we expect to hear about projects. Referral from state agencies and local governments. We have gotten word of quite a few projects coming from DECD. And also through internal referral from our permit programs. So, you know, someone in a permit program might say, you know, we really need an extra level of coordination here. You know, can you all, you know, help us out with, you know, coordinating these different permits for these different divisions, and we have been able to do so. All right, so we're also doing considerable outreach through presentations to deep stakeholder organizations, such as this one. And as Nicole was saying, it's really to convey that our front door is always open for assistance on environmental matters. We coordinate with other state agencies. As I mentioned, we have gotten several concierge projects from DECD. We have biweekly, that's every other week, meetings with DECD to discuss big projects that they are providing financial assistance for, that might be coming down the line to DEEP for permitting needs. And we expect to have future coordination with other state agencies as appropriate. In fact, I've had some conversations with DOT already. Okay.
Neil, this is Harold. I should have done.
Harold.
I should have done this at the beginning. If people have questions, they can submit them to the chat. You'll be able to see them, and Nicole will be able to see them.
Sure, Harold. Yeah, this is actually my last slide. So.
Oh, perfect. And then if anybody has questions from the phone and so forth, always never know how to handle questions. We're figuring this out on Zoom and GoToMeeting and all that other stuff. Sorry for the.
It's okay. It's, you know, it's an interesting thing presenting to a computer instead of actual, you know, faces where I can see people's eyes and their reactions. So I can only see 5 people at once right now. So it's a different experience for sure. Yeah, so this is my last slide. And it's just to let you know that we hope to make continual improvements to this service as time goes on. We've been doing this really since I came back from maternity leave in March. So we've only been doing this for 3 or 4 months. And we're going to be looking at how other states who have concierge services do that. And see how they work. We're going to be conducting several feedback surveys, and Nicole mentioned the feedback survey for pre-application assistance. You know, we want to have some metrics for this service too. So, you know, someday you may receive a survey. So please fill it out and provide your honest feedback on client concierge if you know you've experienced it. And so in this way, you know, we're going to do, check, act, the lean mantra to ensure that we're supporting economic development while upholding our environmental permitting standards. So with that, I will take questions or suggestions via chat or via voice. If Marcy unmutes you, I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
This is Chuck. I will start. So how does this differ from the Ombudsman program, and does that program still exist?
Yeah, so, Nicole, do you want to take this one?
Right, sure. Well, really, the Ombudsman's program, that's, I mean, the permit assistance that the department offers and the, you know, the pre-application meetings, it's really that umbrella of permit assistance. So, in a sense, it is the permit ombudsman, this kind of function that, as Camille mentioned, concierge connoting customer service. And that's what the ombudsman function did as well. So, yes, in a way, this is sort of the new name for that. We want to have bench strength. It's a team approach. So even the staff that have been doing some of the permit assistance, you know, B. Milne is somebody that now, if you've been having pre-application meetings, she's been coordinating a lot of those. And then for Camille, we hope to get another staff on board to be part of her team. So this is all part of this umbrella of permit assistance, that team. So there's not a separate ombudsman function, as you were familiar with. This is it, this umbrella and this component of client concierge. I don't know, Camille. Chuck, does that help? I know that's been a question.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
yes.
Chuck, because
yes.
I know for all of you that have been around a long time, and you're familiar with that term. So, but
okay,
it's that idea, I think that many of you are probably familiar in the past. You know, I'm trying to think of big state-funded projects, when I think of, Rensselaer Field, or when we were working on riverfront recapture, that's sort of saying big complex, we have had a central office kind of to help assist with the sequencing of those permits and working with the programs and providing a single point of contact. That will be some of the pieces that we're doing. But as Camille pointed out, what's interesting is it isn't just necessarily complex. That's what we're finding. I mean, even some of the work we've done with solar, you may only have, a couple of permitting requirements, say construction, stormwater, and NDDB, and yet some of those really need some attention and coordination as they're working their way through the agency. So some of those may be something that come to the forefront. And then with Camille's background with remediation, it's sort of interesting to have that lens too. I tend to come at it from the EPA straight delegated programs, air, water, kind of hazardous waste with the hazardous and solid waste, and then kind of partnering with Camille. It's interesting to me already kind of seeing that lens of pulling the remediation and looking at that even more holistically. And then also bringing the coastal and inland pieces in as well in terms of our coordination.
So, Nicole, it's Harold. A couple of questions just in terms of how this works, and I realize you're feeling your way through, and the way things are now may not be the way they're going to be in 6 months. But how are things going to bubble up? Is it that an application comes in and Camille's going to contact the applicant and say, work through me? Is it going to be staff that's going to identify projects and work with your office? And are applicants going to be discouraged from working with staff on comments and so forth? How does that interplay work, or how do you envision it working?
Right, how we envision it, and Camille, we can talk about as well. As we say, we are kind of feeling our way with this. Again, we are here to, as we said, it's support and complement the technical staff. So they really still are on specific questions that go to. So the way we're doing it right now is, as we mentioned, we're looking as things come in at the pre-application. That's one funnel. I mean, the way Commissioner Dykes was seeing this at the outset is there are different funnels. The way some of these questions are coming in, if there's kind of these thorny projects coming through. And one of the things I see through the pre-application meetings is we can kind of flag that some of these, if it's more complex or in terms of, we're going to see with the coordination of cross programs, there's some of those that we're flagging for ourselves and communicating that to the commissioner, and we're working closely with Deputy Commissioner, Betsy Wingfield in terms of, and those bureau chiefs, so they'll understand that some of the projects that we would be looking at. Some of them may also come in, as we're saying, with this kind of upfront coordination, really trying to be more proactive with DCD. So in the past, sometimes with DCD, it's then we're playing catch up with them when they have questions on projects that they funded and where it is in the permitting. So we want to be upfront and do planning with them. So some of the projects that are going to be, some of the things coming out that they've got on the forefront, economic development projects that are coming through, and they've got deadlines that need to be met, and we're checking in on those. So far, those have been kind of the priority. So to answer your question, the kind of way you said it, and it is also open to, if staff, like the technical staff in a single media, for instance, feel like they're getting bogged down because there's other parts of the agencies that are in play and they need help with that coordination, we're also open to getting those as well, whether they come up directly from staff and then we're coordinating with those managers and the bureau chiefs.
Right.
Yeah, it's like multiple areas the way it's going to come in.
Yeah, and we already have, I guess, a robust project list. So, we've seen projects come in the way Nicole mentioned, and also, there are some larger projects going on that, and I have permission to give this example, but one of the projects that I've been working on is with a company called Lanxess and the borough of Naugatuck. and they're working on establishing the inland port of Naugatuck at the former Chemtura Uniroyal facility in Naugatuck. So it's quite a large-scale project, and it involves many divisions within DEEP, and it involves many state agencies. And so just having an extra level of coordination between all of the various parties has really just smoothed everything out and hopefully put the project on the path to success. Does that answer your question, Harold? You're muted.
Thank you. It does answer my question. And I realize that a lot of it will play out in the interplay between your office and the applicant and your office and staff. But I think that the focus on client service and the client initiative is I appreciate.
Great.
Certainly, thanks. And one of the other things, a couple of things, Harold, thank you. So it definitely is, like I said, the front door to come to if you're kind of having obstacles, whether you come to us first or you're working with the programs. And again, for me, who's been in the agency for a long time and been in the central office for a long time, there is this respect and interplay with the bureaus too, right? So that's why we are working closely with, like I said, Deputy Commissioner Betsy Wingfield, so that they understand that we're supporting, but we're also then asking questions. So it really is kind of this give and take. But to answer it's not as if we're totally taking over on projects. I mean, that wouldn't work. We don't have the technical expertise. That's why we're relying on. The idea with the commissioner with this was really what she saw, a couple projects that had come through, is that the technical staff sometimes don't need to get bogged down by being this sort of liaison and having to coordinate all the pieces. And they have to do some of that, but we can help with that. And Jill pointed out in her presentation, we're smooth. This, it's that lean process improvement. Supposedly, we're freeing up time for staff to focus on the expertise of what they do, and then we can kind of fill that in and do some of this coordination. Even some of the miscommunication sometimes, frankly, even, for instance, with DCD, kind of what's really going on with the project, and then we could kind of get to the heart of it and help communicate that.
Any other questions for Camille and Nicole?
Well, I'll ask one if no one else is stepping up. Would someone who's not necessarily having technical problems with the process or with the details and the interagency issues and stuff if they just have a problem with the timing, for example, that they've been waiting months and months, is this something that the concierge service would also be of assistance to?
Yeah, Chuck. Yes. If there's often, permit sequencing that needs to happen for a project, and so, not that this is, insider information, but, for example, construction stormwater general permit takes about 60 days to process. An NDDB review takes several weeks to process. So, you have to have the NDDB before you have the stormwater general permit. So just how things, fit together and understanding that and having an understanding of the timing of different, parts of the agency is we can help with that.
I mean, that is really, thank you, Camille. I mean, Chuck, I'm focusing on saying the technical staff, but the sequencing piece is really, when we say look at holistically in the coordination across programs, that is really that's the crux of it, because there is so much interplay with delivering the final product to, like we're saying, the client in terms of customer service. So Absolutely. And it's making sure the programs are working together to understand, like Camille is a great example, pointed out, in terms of NDDB, we understand that that's kind of a linchpin for a lot of our permitting processes. And as you know, also 20 by 20, I'll make a pitch for that. We are going to have our spring report. It's a little late, but today is the last day of spring. So we're having that out, and we are, it's kind of an abbreviated version, but one of the things we're unveiling in the 20 by 20 this time is a timeline on, we've added NDDB, which is interesting, right? Because we've got the permit timeframes in there already in 20 by 20, but because NDDB is such a big part of that, and we know 20 by 20, we've been working on the, there is going to be, you know, this portal that we hope to have by the fall that will make it easier in terms of people, whether they're in or out or needing this determination letter on NDDB. But in the meantime, we want people to see kind of, it's kind of astounding, to be honest. I mean, NDDB, I think we all know about those thorny ones, but they get about 1,000 requests in per year, and you should be surprised, and it's only about 20%, like how small what they have that's outstanding that actually goes longer than a month. They process so many very quickly. So it's a good story to tell, but it's something that we're going to be tracking. Sorry, I digressed a little bit, but thanks.
Well, we have 70 other people out there that are, feel free to ask questions. I don't see anything in chat, but if you have anything for Nicole or Camille, feel free. Put your video on, your mic on, and ask away. Or if you're very shy, you don't have to put your video on.
It is rather close up.
Or we can just let Chuck call on you and have you ask a question.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I also wanted to share that's kind of organic, that's coming out of, you know, with Camille and then all the discussions we've been having, it's always great to have sort of a refresh, right, on even current processes. And I just wanted to know, even the time of teleworking, our pre-application meeting requests have just continued to come in a constant, you know, we'll have several a week, and I'm more conscious of them because Camille's participating, and now, you know, I'm getting notices of them, and which is really great to see how many projects are still, you know, things are continuing to move forward. But the other thing that we're starting to flag that come out of pre-app that's interesting, because we are kind of Office of Planning, is to look at, we're coining it the kind of policy and technical issues that come up. So pre-app, you know, we're flagging some of the ones that can be client concierge, but we're also realizing to try to support staff. When questions come up, if somebody has a new technology, or especially kind of within the waste arena, that it comes up, you know, you're talking about food waste and anaerobic digesters and different that you start seeing, you know, common practices or common requests coming up. So we have to end up saying, you know, is it square peg in a round hole? What sort of a regulatory framework do we have for our permitting process? And as you know, we have certain general permits, but is there an opportunity that, I mean, I know for years this has probably happened, that it comes up of, you know, why do we end up having to come up with a new general permit for a certain type of, you know, something that's coming up? But we want to make sure we're kind of at that forefront again in planning. So if anybody has that, so we've started, like I said, it's this pattern of practice. You've seen questions and they come up. And so, for instance, Frank Gagliardi, that many of you know in solid waste, who's a supervisor, and he'll be at a pre-app meeting having to sort of say, okay, this is this general permit, but does it really fit within that? And maybe for now we do it as a demonstration project, you know, but maybe this is something long-term that's really more of a general permit. So that's also the very exciting piece of this too, right? We want to be nimble and be agile to be able to adjust as things change. And some of our frameworks may, like I said, not accommodate some of the new opportunities that we have in terms of kind of problem solving.
Nicole and Camille, could you talk a little bit about the relationship with the Siting Council? And is this part of the client concierge service function? Is it a separate function in terms of soliciting comments from the department and addressing comments on any particular siting council application?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. And Camille, I mean, this came up when we spoke to the Connecticut Environmental Forum as well. You know, we're looking holistically at a program. So as Camille was talking about, when we talk about interagency and, you know, you're looking holistically at the whole sequencing for a permit, it's not just within DEEP. You're right. It is. Is it going to need something from DOT? What do they need from the municipalities? So Camille, we probably should talk about that a little bit, the municipalities. I'll just finish on siting council. So, and then in terms of the siting council, that definitely comes up because there is that interplay now, especially to say, to have that conversation of understanding, have they gone through the siting council yet? If it is a project that needs to go, or when are they coming to us? I know, for instance, for many of you that worked in the solar recently, it's really been our construction stormwater general permit program, you know, stormwater, encouraging people to kind of come to us and start working with us early on. And because you want to get to that detail. And maybe it's in parallel. I mean, maybe you get things before going to the siting, but maybe it's kind of in parallel. So it's kind of a balance, a dance. It depends on the type of project, but we definitely want to be conscious of how those processes work together. But Camille, do you want to comment? Because that was out of the last, it was exciting to think about at the municipal level, because as we talk about, those reviews are critical too when you're doing sequencing on our permitting, DEEP's permitting.
Right. Well, I was just going to add on to what you were saying. We've seen an increase in pre-application meeting requests for solar development in particular, and anything, as I understand it, anything larger than a 1 megawatt array would, you know, come before the siting council. So it is important to understand, you know, at what point in the process it goes before the siting council, and, you know, to see if that particular parcel is appropriate in various different ways. You know, some of the things that, you know, we've been seeing, for example, are, you know, issues with stormwater and drainage, and just making sure that, you know, the solar developer has a good understanding of how that's going to happen, you know, with their array at the outset is very beneficial to them and their whole design process before, you know, they would go to the siting council.
Right. So thanks. So one of the things to know, the siting, and I do laugh again, this is the upfront planning. This is what, you know, this is what we wanted, right? So we work with BETP, you know, our energy policy office in our branch, right? Our energy branch, when they were doing their request for proposal and doing their procurement of solar. So we in the planning office have worked a lot with them to try to have them beef up like the environmental impact part of that, and to actually give more weight to that in the RFPs. But also as part of that, we've said, if you're selected, we want you to go have a pre-application meeting. So what's interesting is we're now seeing the flood. I mean, of, you know, whether it was a 2016 selection of an RFP or the more recent one, which is great. This is what we wanted, and we asked them to come in, and that's what they're doing. But we also get projects that are not part of our own procurement that DEEP has not recommended. And obviously, our doors open to everybody in terms of any of the solar projects. So thanks, Camille. But the municipal piece too. Do you want to touch upon that?
Oh, in what respect, Nicole?
The outreach to municipalities. So that's a key point too. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, during you know, before our meeting with CEF, where I made a similar presentation, you know, it had been mentioned at CEF, and it had been something that we had been considering beforehand, that, you know, part of our outreach will extend to, you know, economic development offices for municipalities, and to council of governments, and those types of venues. So this is going to be, you know, we're on tour, and we are, you know, going to be talking to municipalities directly as well. And thank you to those who have provided contact information to me. I appreciate that. So yeah, we are also considering consolidating our information on for municipalities, such as the municipal primer that we had put out several years ago, and also another thing I have been thinking about is the prepared municipal workbook for brownfields. So there's, you know, resources in different places for municipalities that we would like to consolidate in one place, and hopefully over time this website that's displayed here in the presentation, we can make it a more holistic permit assistance web page, and have you know, some more consolidated information in that one website, one part of the website.
Right. Thanks, Gail. And as you talk about municipal, thank you. It also makes me think back to Harold when you were asking about the siting council. So, for instance, several of the calls I've been returning this week on a particular solar project, what really comes up in a municipal level when you have neighbors asking about certain projects, the public reaching out to us, that interplay of, you know, what's going to be considered at the local level, or which, like, so if the siting council is involved, which is the piece that they're preempting, that it's really, you need to go to the siting council. And then people asking that specific question that you raised, like, what about the sequencing? And then, you know, the public's looking for where is their opportunity to weigh in on those projects. So it is very important. Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? Going once, going twice.
Harold?
Yeah.
I don't know. Hey, everybody. Hi, Nicole and Camille.
Oh, hi, Eric.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
How are you
Good.
doing?
How are you? Sorry for
Good.
being late. So I apologize, I missed the start of your presentation, but my understanding is this is an initiative that came right out of the department, right? You weren't required to do this, or you know, there was no legislation that, you know, asked for this. Is that right?
That is true. Yes.
Right.
Yes, it's from the Commissioner's 20 by 20 initiative.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just going to say, you know, to the extent you guys get inquiry from, you know, the legislators or the Environment Committee or whatever, you know, please let us know. I mean, if they're looking for feedback or you're looking for support, you know, we'd be happy to engage with them on that. So just really appreciate all your effort on this, and you know, we'll be trying to sort of compile stories about, you know, how this has been helpful to businesses, and sort of have those in our back pocket and share with you and anybody else who's interested.
Great. Thank you very much. That would be fantastic. One of the things that I hope to highlight on the webpage in the future is, you know, permitting success stories. So, you know, so often we're involved really in, you know, the business of just getting it done, and it would be great to have some testimonials on the website. So that'd be great. Thank you.
We can relate to that as an organization as well.
Yeah.
Camille and Nicole, this has been a terrific presentation. It's very informative, and the dialogue was terrific today. And we look forward to working with you both with respect to the new initiative.
Thank you so much, Harold. We really appreciate it. Can I just say to Ann Peters, congratulations. It's been a pleasure working with you these past 15 years. I'm very happy for you. Congrats. And thanks again for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation to you all.
Yes, thanks so much, all of you. Great seeing all of you. Thank you. Best of luck, and
see you.
Okay. Well, have a nice weekend, everyone. Happy Father's Day.
Take care. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Well, it's nice to see you, Eric.
How do we get out?
And you as well, Chuck, and 72 other folks, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me take this opportunity to thank Marcy, who's been just doing a terrific job and pulling these together, organizing them, hosting them, and Chuck, you and the rest of the team for really moving, I think, the E2 in a direction that I think it's needed to go for a long time, which is more member-driven, more steering committee-driven, and so I think it's obviously paying off in terms of the numbers and the attendance. So Marcy and Chuck and Harold and all that are working so hard on this, really appreciate it. And I think I may have missed a announcement earlier. Do you have a date? Is this the last time we're going to see you in an official capacity?
It is my last official time. So, and I have to say, I love all this attention. So, yep, I will, as I said, I will very much miss these meetings, and they've been informative, but also always just so enjoyable. So it's
well, I'll just echo Camille's comments. I mean, I don't know how many years it's been, but it's been a joy, every one of them. And as many times as I've tried to annoy you or get you upset or mispronounce your firm's name or whatever, you're inflappable. And there's always that smile and always the open hand and willing to help out. So congratulations to you, and all the best. And you're always welcome back to, join in, but I'm sure you'll have more exciting things to do probably.
Well, I don't know, but thank you, Eric. It has been a pleasure. So I will miss this.
We do find that a number of people who do retire do come back for guest appearances from time to time. So we're going to move into our group meetings or task force meetings. But one thing I think they referenced during the 2020, there is a new report out in there that they posted, I guess, or gave us a link, right, Harold? So
it got posted yesterday. It's the spring report for 2020 and 20.
I noticed one thing, because this is near and dear to my heart, on the spill reporting, that they said they're going to initiate a focused engagement with stakeholders sometime this summer. So I guess we're not seeing a draft right away, but so that's in advance of a draft for public comment. So seems like we're going back to the past. With that, I'll turn it over to our preeminent energy task force czar, Lee Hoffman.
I'm not preeminent in anything, but God bless you for thinking I am, Chuck. To be perfectly candid with you, it took everything I had to keep the mute button on. The permit concierge service is very interesting, but all we're doing is getting speedier gridlock for the permitting of solar projects, particularly on the stormwater side, which is going to be kind of interesting because today's presentation is going to be about Connecticut's integrated resources plan. So rather than do the slides myself, I plagiarized from the Connecticut Deep. They did the integrated resource plan meeting showing some preliminary modeling results, and I truncated a fairly lengthy presentation down to just 10 minutes worth to give everybody an idea as to what's going on. So if I could get to the next slide. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Integrated Resource Plan, it's required under Connecticut's energy statutes to be a planning document that the state is supposed to use to figure out the state's energy needs, both what it thinks the load is going to be, as well as what it thinks the resources are that are going to be able to address that load. And if you take a look at everything that the Integrated Resource Plan has to consider by statute, one of the things that you'll see is it's all over the map. Figuring out demand growth, air quality standards, greenhouse gas standards, energy security, using energy efficiency, how we combine our various generation resources to make a cohesive generation portfolio, different fuel types we use, and you see it down there towards the bottom, cost impacts on the ratepayers. But you also see that if you go to the fourth bullet point, the priority to meet resource needs through energy efficiency and demand reduction measures that are cost-effective, reliable, and feasible. So there's really a reliability component, but cost is mentioned twice. If you could go to the next slide. What is interesting about that is Governor Lamont, in issuing order number 3, of course, put in the bold is obviously added, but Governor Lamont wants DEEP to work through the IRP process and figure out how to get to Lamont's goal of 100% zero carbon target for the electric generation sector by 2040. So unsurprisingly, if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is that's where the focus now is on our IRP. It's not so much on, it's on fuel mix a little bit, but the fuel mix is really how to get to zero carbon by 2040. And cost effective and reliable presumes that it's cost effective and reliable only as we move to a zero carbon future. So it doesn't take into account the fact that natural gas may be more reliable or nuclear may be more reliable or more cost efficient. It's really how do we bring in these zero carbon technologies. So if you take a look, the questions that they're asking, number 1 deals with decarbonization, number 2 deals with zero carbon, number 3 deals with zero carbon, and number 4 is zero carbon. So that's what the IRP is looking to address. It doesn't really talk about real reliability and real cost to the ratepayers. What it does is it plans for a zero carbon future, and then in light of that zero carbon future, how do we make it as cheap as possible? And I think that that's a distinction with a real difference. But putting that aside, and going to the next slide, we take a look at what the math that DEEP is actually doing. So DEEP hired Levitan and Associates rather than have the Bureau of Energy and Technology Policy do this itself. It hired Levitan to really help it figure out what we're going to have for a load and what we're going to need in order to meet that load. And so what you see is on the load level, Levitan ran 2 models. They ran, and those are the top 2 boxes on the chart. They ran what's called the business as usual load. So this is what's based on ISO New England's forecast, and if everything keeps going the way that we think it's going to keep going, and I suppose eventually we kind of hiding from COVID, what's business as usual going to be in New England? And then the second load is a larger load that presumes that we're going to have, can you go back a slide, Marcy? Thanks. That presumes that we're going to have electrification of transportation, so more people are going to be driving electric cars, as well as building heating is actually going to go a little bit more electric as the renewables come online, they want to get rid of oil and gas heat for buildings and have that be electrified. And then you add into that the decarbonization. So what would happen if we tried to decarbonize using business as usual? And then those are the bottom two boxes. And then what would happen if we really made a move towards decarbonization, not only of the electric generation sector, but also of transportation and building heat? And so that's what you get with that. And when you look at it on the next slide, the numbers are kind of staggering. So if you look at the two left-hand columns, what you'll see is if you do a business as usual base case, you get 10 gigawatts of resource additions and 6 gigawatts of retirement. So the expectation is that some of the older power plants are going to retire, some of the less efficient ones. Right now, there's a lot of natural gas-fired power plants that aren't firing at all in Connecticut and actually throughout New England. As more solar comes online, as we anticipate more offshore wind coming online, and we do expect that, we do also expect that some of these units will retire. And they're basing that base case solely on what they know is in the pipeline, the offshore wind that they've already contracted, et cetera, et cetera. If you plan for greater electrification, that's the lower left-hand corner, where you've got greater electrification, but it's still just business as usual. You're going to, just a tiny more amount of retirement happens as a result of that, but you have a significant uptick in what you need in order for resources. If, however, you move to the right-hand side of the page, and what they're calling balanced blend is meeting incremental greenhouse gas reductions and moving towards a zero carbon 2040. Now, because this is all of New England, you won't get to zero carbon because there will be places that are still burning oil, gas, and or coal, but and most gas. But you will have more and more onshore wind coming on, a little bit of solar, et cetera, battery storage, and the like. And when you take a look at that, you've got either 23 megawatts of additional resources, so more than double what a base case would be, or if you go down in the lower right-hand corner where we're electrifying transportation and buildings while trying to get to zero carbon, you need to build 28 gigawatts worth of resource additions. And the reason for that is you have to overbuild the renewables because there are times when the wind doesn't blow or the sun isn't shining or both, and battery storage will take you only so far. And as a result, you have to overbuild these resources and pay gas and other fossil units to at least be available online for those days. Otherwise, the grid loses reliability. And if you go to the next slide, you see that graphically represented, right? So every time you see balance blend in the column that is second from the left and the column that is furthest to the right, every time you see balance blend, what you see is that huge buildup of resources that will need to be done in order to make that happen. And you can look at Marcy's got it as a handout. She emailed it to you, and you can take a look at the charts yourself to figure out exactly where stuff is behind the meter solar versus battery storage versus offshore wind or what have you. But what you can see is there's a significant uptick in the resources that need to be deployed. And a lot of it, as you can also see, is battery storage. That's what needs to be applied. But if you go to the next slide and you take a look at the pie chart, the pie chart gets really interesting as well, because what happens is if you take a look at your base case scenario, right, whether you increase electrification for the transportation sector, which is again the lower left pie chart, or you just keep things as we think they're going to be now, you see that there's still a significant gas, oil, and or coal component to our electric grid. If, however, you go to the balanced blend, what you see is you see energy efficiency increasing for the electrification pieces, but you see the gas, coal, and oil units significantly narrow, cut in half. You see nuclear staying constant, and you see offshore wind growing and growing and growing. So what happens is offshore wind is projected, if we keep things normal, is projected to be less than 20% of our generation providers. However, if we go with fully electrifying as much as we possibly can, and we go to zero carbon, it's clear that they're putting all of their eggs in the basket of offshore wind, or at least most of them. Yes, solar increases somewhat, but it doesn't increase a whole lot. If you take a look at the gains in solar, it really doesn't increase a ton. And that's not surprising, because I think during the permit concierge conversation, Nicole and Camille both talked about the permitting challenges associated with solar and how that's taking up most of the permit concierge time. And I'll tell you that that certainly comports with my experience as well. And so I don't see where we're going to get a whole ton of land-based solar. We'll have some smaller behind the meter projects, but the big grid scale stuff, it's still very difficult to permit. And the last slide that I have is just here's what's up. So if anybody wants to comment on the draft of the Integrated Resources Plan, comments are due in a couple of weeks, July 2nd by 4 o'clock, and then they're going to start refining everything on the IRP and start taking a look at other pieces of the IRP. So this is the decarbonization piece. We still have to do, I don't know what they're going to talk about with deregulation. It has me a little bit scared, but this whole thing will come to a conclusion probably by the end of the year. And this is a fairly aggressive timeline. But if anybody has any comments on these models or whatever else have you, the time to get the comments in is on July 2nd. And that's the end of the slides. The only other thing that I will mention is that several parties have, totally switching gears here, but back to the stormwater issue that Nicole and Camille touched on, several parties have asked for a public hearing on the department's draft general permit for construction, particularly the changes that relate to solar. And there are entities that believe that the new regulations are too strict. There are entities that believe that the regulations are not strict enough. There was an attempt to negotiate a settlement. I think that attempt, I just think that Ozzy isn't having it. So my guess is that this goes to public hearing sometime in the summer and probably winds up with the department evaluating all the comments, patting itself on the back because it's annoyed both sides equally. It'll say that it has the right approach, and we'll just go forward and finalize the draft general permit as it currently sits. But that's just a guess. And at this stage of the game, I'll shut up and ask if there are any questions.
Hi, Lee. It's Tom Guerra from CBIA Energy Connections. On the policy assessment of deregulation, do we have any level of detail regarding what that entails?
We have no level of detail as to what that entails, but I have an educated guess, Tom. So as a result of the FERC's decision on MOPR in the PJM, where PJM tried to make changes to the market so that renewables were favored, And FERC struck that down, and FERC is reconsidering it, et cetera, et cetera. There is real concern on Katie Dykes' part, and she had a full-day technical hearing, and I'm pretty sure that Eric was there for this, talking about how as a result of going to a deregulated market in New England and having ISO New England being the entity in charge of the market, ISO's not doing enough to promote renewables. And if it doesn't do more to promote renewables, then market forces just answer to the market, and they don't consider externalities such as greenhouse gases and the like. And I'm not sure what they can really do about deregulation. There's been talk since we deregulated in the 90s. As soon as Enron fell apart, there's always been talk about putting the toothpaste back in the tube. But the reality is, with all due respect to Chuck and others who are at Eversource and at United Illuminating, I don't know how those companies would go back to being vertically integrated monopolistic utilities. I'm not suggesting that if we could just snap our fingers Thanos style, if we had all of the Infinity Stones and just go back to a fully integrated regulated utility, that wouldn't be a better way to do it. But what Deep has been talking about is really pie in the sky thinking, and I would have no idea how you would actually accomplish that given the IPP market and everything else that's been structured. I do think, however, that ISO's very, very nervous because it's looking at the intermittency issues, and it's going to have to, the market's going to have to adjust to allow greater payments to fossil fueled generators who are acting as the grid backup, because as we expand our solar production and we expand our wind production, we're still going to need a traditional backup or something. Maybe it can all be done by battery, but for right now, I anticipate that ISO is going to go through some real market changes, but that's just a guess.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? I'll just chime in quickly that I'm on twice a week calls now with folks at DECD and others that mainly focuses on manufacturing issues. Sometimes gets a little broader than that. And the last week or two, a couple of times, they brought up kind of out of nowhere, an increasing focus on this offshore wind as an economic development opportunity. They frame it like that, but obviously, the policy that the administration's pursuing is driving a lot of that. So I just throw that out there to say, this is not all just within, Katie Dykes' universe or bubble, that this is being sort of rising in profile. It's obviously a cross-agency and administrative priority.
And I think the reality is that if I had to make a bet, I would bet on the offshore wind industry supplying power to New England. There's a lot of reasons for that. One, it happens to be a resource that regionally, not so much Connecticut, but regionally, we have a ton of really good wind. We're just by dint of geography and where the wind blows, it blows on the Atlantic coast. It just does. Number two, the thing for Connecticut that makes it nice is it winds up treating our energy much like we treat our landfills. That is to say, we don't have any landfills in Connecticut anymore. If we need to landfill something, we ship it out of state. And if you do offshore wind, it's kind of a similar thing. You don't have to look at the nasty windmills up in the northwest corner of the state. You don't have to look at the solar panels. You don't have to see any construction. You just get to build the offshore wind elsewhere. But let's be clear that with the exception of the port development and the building of the parts for this isn't going to be I don't think this is going to be the economic boon that people think that it will be for a long-term scale. A lot of those jobs are going to go New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly it's better than the maritime development that we have now in Connecticut, which is 0. So any increase looks infinite by way of comparison. But frankly, I think offshore wind is here to stay, and we've made our bet on it.
Absolutely. I was on an ISO New England call 2 weeks ago, and that was the entire gist of the call is that's the direction they're heading in. So time to invest in the cabling companies, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, thank you very much, Lee. Anybody else for Lee before he takes his beautiful face off the screen? Okay, next up we have water, and we have I think both Debbie and Wojtek are on, and I'll let them take it from here.
Yes, hello, good morning all. A couple of updates for today. Most importantly, I would say everybody's going to be interested to hear about the status of the miscellaneous general permit. So there was a status conference held yesterday between the two parties, and they came to an agreement. So the petition for hearing was withdrawn by the POTWs. The dialogue will continue, of course, through implementation. There was some concern about the nitrogen limits that are currently in the general permit. It sounds like the limits are going to be reduced to 8 pounds per day. So that's per, right now it's ammonia and nitrate. So per parameter is 8 pounds. Sounds like Jim Creighton's going to generate a comparison document so that we can see the changes between the public notice version, which I believe was about January last year, and then the changes that's going to be issued in the final. So the effective date is going to be October 30th of this year. Ozzy thinks that we're going to see the final issued in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So maybe in a month.
So Debbie, who won out?
Well, it seems like Ozzy won out. There were, I guess, some, of course, negotiations. So there were originally the miscellaneous covered all industrial users, and there was a kind of, I'll say, de minimis flow of 1,000 gallons per day. So if you're less than that, you don't have to register. You still, have to follow the requirements in the general permit, but no need to register. Any other comments on that? All right, I see a couple of people on this list who have NPDES permits, so I just wanted to let you know that the annual fee invoices have not gone out yet. There's, I guess they're now going to be sent via email, which to me sounds, I guess, a little scary. So the new due date for those is September 30th. So if you don't see that invoice in the next few weeks, I would say maybe reach out to your permit writer to see where that invoice is. I know not all up to date on the emails in their communication, so worth noting. Also, just wanted to let you guys know I've had some issues with the change to the DEEP's website. Their listserv seems to have been experiencing some issues lately. So if you haven't been receiving your typical emails that you see, so I had signed up for like the public notices, and they had essentially stopped. And then thankfully had a permit writer who said, oh, here's your permit. It's been public noticed. And I was like, well, that's weird. I didn't get an email about that. So she had reached out and magically they started coming again. So just wanted to alert you to that. And then the integrated water quality report has been drafted. This has to do with the impaired waters list that goes to Congress. And DEEP is seeking public comments about that, and they are due today. And Lee, just wanted to thank you for your update on the construction stormwater because I hadn't heard that. So thanks for that. And that's the highlights. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
Hey, Debbie, this is Matt from Loureiro. I have a question for you about the miscellaneous and the new SIU GPs.
Yes.
Did Ozzy give any direction with regard to the 90-day requirement for re-registration under the miscellaneous general permit?
Yep. So that's most likely going to be 90 days after, right? So we don't have to scramble to get those in by July. So it's now going to change to 90 days after.
So that'd be 90 days after the October effective date.
30th. Yep.
Okay.
And that's most likely going to be the same for the SIU general permit. I forgot to mention that, so thanks for bringing that up. So once they get squared away with the miscellaneous, they're going to move on to the significant industrial user general permit. This is going to be an expansion now of what's called the categorical general permit that covers only metal finishers and is now going to be expanded to include all significant industrial users. So the state is going to maintain implementation and enforcement regarding significant industrial users, where the notification for the miscellaneous is going to go to the POTWs directly.
Do they expect the SIU to be effective in October as well, or is that looking for?
I believe so. Yep. That's what I heard.
Thank you.
Very hopeful. Yeah. Thank you. Matt, I see your functional equivalence. I have no idea how that's going to change things in Connecticut yet. So I can't really answer that. Haven't heard anything much on that.
Hey, Debbie, this is Wojtek. Thank you for mentioning the delay in the annual fees. And according to the email I got, they're still going to mail them out in early August. So that's just one note.
Good. Thanks. Yeah, I just got an email through the municipal listserv that said email, which I was like, ah.
So this is Chuck, and I'll let the other lawyers weigh in too. But on the Maui decision, since Connecticut permits theoretically discharges to groundwater, I don't see that having too much of an impact on us. So because we already have a state permitting program for that. Anybody disagree?
Yeah, Chuck, this is Matt. So I guess the question being raised was, and this came up in a discussion with some Rhode Island attorneys where there's RIPDs, was do you now have to get, if you have a direct discharge to groundwater, will you possibly also need to have the state DES permit as well? What is the implication of this requirement that this change in definition of the functional equivalent of direct discharge. Does it now mean you'll need to get 2 permits, or will the state have to revise their direct discharge program?
This is Bob Melvin. I think the biggest impact will be on leaks, on tanks, and any other kind of leak that would normally not be deliberate permitted discharge. Any facility like that that's near a river or stream is exposed to a citizen suit, and potentially DEP could also look at that now as a functional equivalent of a discharge and take enforcement for lack of a permit.
Well, they can do that now if, for any kind of spill that hits the water body, but you're right, if it hits the groundwater first, but then they could argue it under the state law that you didn't have a permit for that spill into the groundwaters and do under 22A16, theoretically.
Yeah, I just think the citizen suit exposure is particularly significant.
Well, they haven't been too active on the regular discharges. And I think it's going to be some time before the feds come to some kind of consistency on what is a functional equivalent, because this is going back to the court there in Hawaii, and there are going to be other circuits and district courts are going to weigh in. So it's going to be some time, and who knows what EPA will provide as guidance. So I don't see anything happening in the near term to give you any specific guidance on getting a federal permit for these things, but no. So unless somebody is going to start citizen suits up again. I mean, obviously we had a whole bunch of them in the 80s. So, but I haven't heard.
Should we invite Roger Reynolds to one of these meetings, Chuck?
There you go. I'm
just trying to generate business.
Well, yeah, Anne's retired. Maybe she can set up, she can be on the green side and start filing citizen suits.
Connecticut's been quiet compared to that period, but you certainly have a lot of activity in Massachusetts. I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable, take great comfort in the lack of recent activity. That could change. The main thing is if you have that kind of a discharge through groundwater reaching a surface water, that's the best solution is to get control of the plume and eliminate that kind of a discharge.
I agree, Bob, but I think the other thing is, there's been I just refer back to the department's mantra, if you will, that all groundwater discharge is surface water, and that's been a mantra in Massachusetts and Rhode Island as well. So seems to extend it farther. Okay, thank you.
All right. So we'll move it along to the air task force for Steve and Dave. Either one of them on?
But, hey, Chuck, can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, good. So we got a few updates for everybody. And then just before we touch on those, we had heard from DEEP. They've done some analysis on air quality impacts based on COVID-19. And they've actually put out some brief videos on their website. So if anyone's interested, there's a handful of short videos that they put together going through their data and analysis of kind of what they've been doing to see how the air quality has been impacted as a result of the recent pandemic situation. So they have these 4 videos. They have a kind of an air quality 101 quick overview of how they monitor things. You have this nice little cartoon here where they'll go through some of the sources of both local and upwind air pollution and atmospheric chemistry, and just kind of where things are coming from. And then you can go to the next slide, Marcy. Then there's an interesting, this is a satellite image. So these are, if you look at the image on the left, this is satellite analysis of NO2 ambient concentrations. So the slide on the left is average ambient concentrations from the period of March in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. And you can see the darker colors are higher concentrations. So where you kind of expect, I guess, typically to see higher NO2, which is almost entirely from fuel combustion. There's other sources, but it's mostly, vehicles and industrial activity. So pretty much up and down the 95 corridor and along the East Coast. But then when you look at the slide on the right, that's March of this year, and there's a significant reduction to the darker areas. So we have lower NO2 concentrations, pretty much throughout the state of Connecticut and the whole eastern portion of the country. So interesting to see that, and it's I think the the thought is it's really just entirely less cars on the road and less fossil fuel combustion as a whole are leading to that. So NO2 is important because it's a precursor to ozone, which we typically see later on in the summer. So it'll be interesting to see if this initial trend of less NO2 has any impact on what we see for ozone formation. So I guess that'll be to be determined. But you can go to the next slide, Marcy. This is a different set of satellite imagery, but it shows the same concept, but for the country overall. So there's the yellow and red are higher NO2 concentrations. So you can see not just for the East Coast, but Midwest and out in California too. There's significant reduction to NO2 levels from this year compared to previously. So we do the next slide, Marcy. And this is DEEP has part of their ambient monitoring network. They also have they do some traffic analysis in Hartford. So you see the vertical dotted line, that's the early March stay-at-home directive from the state. So prior to that, those are vehicle counts. So it's about a 40% drop-off in vehicle count from prior to the stay-at-home directive and afterwards. So that's almost exactly in line with what we're seeing for NO2 reduction. So about a 40% drop in both vehicle traffic, but also in NO2 reduction. So there's seems to be a direct link for air quality from mobile sources right there. Okay, Marcy, you could go to the next one. So overall, there's NO2 is the big one that it's almost exclusively from fossil fuel combustion, and it's important for our ozone formation. So, and that's been the biggest reduction. So depending on location throughout the state, there's like a 13 to 37% reductions that have been noted recently. 7 to 21% for carbon monoxide, 0 to 57% for SO2. So I think the northwest corner of the state is basically seeing the same SO2 as they normally see. But I think the New Haven station, monitoring station, saw a 57% reduction. So interestingly, the PM2.5 monitors are not really showing much or any noticeable reduction in ambient concentrations compared to previous years. But there's a noticeable reduction to black carbon, which is also monitored, and that's really used to identify individual species within the total PM2.5 that's in the atmosphere. So Not sure exactly if DEEP has a specific understanding of the reason for that, but it's interesting that the black carbon, one major component or source of that is diesel, and we've been seeing less traffic on the roads and less fossil fuel combustion overall, so that kind of is in line with everything else, but yet our ambient PM2 and 2.5 concentrations are not really changing. So that's kind of interesting, and not sure if that is an indication that our mobile sources aren't having as much impact on the overall PM2.5 concentrations, or if that could just have to do with the way the data has been collected thus far. It's yet to be determined, but it's interesting. So, and DEEP kept saying throughout, presenting this, data is preliminary. It hasn't been quality assured yet, and it's all still very early on. But clearly, it seems that there is a net decrease in NO2 for sure and other pollutants from the whole recent pandemic situation. Okay, Marcy, we could do the next slide. So that was just the COVID stuff and some other updates before we wrap up. So the GPLPE regulatory program has been submitted to Regs Review Committee, so they're on the agenda for the July meeting. If that's, depends on whether that is approved or not, but DEEP is hopeful that, even if it gets kicked back from that July meeting, they can still, make some changes, get it on the August meeting, and have a effective regulation by September. So we'll see about how that goes along. Similar to NPDES fees that Debbie was talking about, Title V permit emission fees are extended to September 30th. So those, and I think same schedule, though I don't believe those invoices have been mailed out yet, but they'll be, I think, coming soon. And just interesting, Rick Roderick noted that, the total inventory of criteria pollutants billed for 2019 is around 7,500 tons. So that's, lower than last year. And then compared to 1990, when there were 133,665 tons. So emissions continue a downward trend that has been going on for a long time. So interesting to note. And lastly, DEEP's been giving their guidance on electronic submittal of reports as they're still working from home. So they just want to reiterate that SEDRI is, an acceptable option for anything. So even if it's not a specific air regulatory program that is managed through SEDRI, you can use SEDRI to submit any state or federal report. So it's a little bit of a pain in the neck to get initially set up, but once you're in it, it actually is a pretty good, it's pretty convenient. You can, one submittal simultaneously goes to DEEP and EPA, everything's time-stamped. It satisfies the federal signatory requirements, so it takes the place of, anything that needs an official certification. So keep that in mind. And then for DEEP reports, you can send it to the email address for the Compliance Analysis and Coordination Unit, and anything can go there. And just a note on that, Keith Hill clarified that for a state report, if you scan a PDF that has a signature on it, then that can be emailed, and that's sufficient. You don't need to also send in a hard copy with the signature on it. And as always, Title V and GPLPE can continue to just go through the emit and easy file system. So that's what we had for updates from the air stuff. If there's any questions, we can chat about it. But otherwise, have a great weekend.
Thanks, Dave. So I noticed that you just had March pictures up there. Anything for the subsequent months? I had to do comparison. And I'm probably not alone in this, but if you've driven out on the roads lately, it seems like traffic is almost up to normal, at least during regular daytime. I'm not sure. Obviously, the peaks aren't the same, but there's a lot of cars out there.
Yeah, so no data for April or May has been released yet. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like as, you know, the summer goes on. And likewise, yeah, with the roads, I don't think their data from the traffic counts have been released either. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, it could be this was just like a very brief dip and where you're back to what they typically see. Well, it'll be interesting to see how, over the summer, how things play out.
Yeah, and for, half of March, people were still doing normal travel. So it will be interesting. All right. So yeah, I know we're running over a little bit, but I'll turn it over to Harold, and I know he'll wrap up in record time.
I can do that, Chuck. Couple things to note for all of you. With respect to what we talked about earlier, Deep's 20 and 20 spring update, which is on their website, with respect to the EUR and the Wave 2 draft regulations, I've learned that the hearing officer's report is done. It has not been posted yet, but the next step is to post, which may be by the end of June, and then to send the draft regs over to the Attorney General's office for their review. With respect to spill reporting, as Chuck noted, the spring update makes reference to another stakeholder meeting to discuss the framework for spill reporting. Deep is not going to release the whatever they've been working on with respect to spill reporting in terms of regulations. It sounds like until after this stakeholder process meeting, and then whatever unfolds after that. The next Solid Waste Advisory Committee is June 23rd. I have not seen an agenda for that yet, but I believe they're going forward virtually. And finally, on page 11 of the task force summary, there's a couple of PFAS items. One, New Jersey has implemented very low PFAS water quality standards for PFOA and PFOS at 14 and 13 PPT, respectively. And EPA has issued their final rule with respect to TRI reporting that adds 172 PFAS substances, a list of chemicals that's recorded to be reported. This will be for the 2020 reporting year, but due in July of 2021. I also want to wish Ann well on her retirement. I see her there next to a window with lots of light and lots of trees. And so I wanted to wish you well, Ann. And Chuck, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Well, that was quick. And did you say page 11? You've been busy. I guess you have nothing else to do.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right. Well, I thank everybody for attending this June edition of the virtual E2 monthly meeting. We are on again for both July and August, again on Friday. And July will be a special appearance by someone from PURA that Lee will graciously make available. And in August, I think it's somebody from the Air Bureau. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe. You can leave home. That's okay. We're in phase 2. So, but be careful out there. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Happy Father's Day.
Yes.
Thank you, Marcy.
Bye, everyone. Good luck, Ann. We'll see you.
Thank you. Goodbye, guys.
Happy retirement, Ann.
Yeah.